Welcome to the Higher Ed Retire Podcast with your host, Greg Shepard. Greg is a fee-only financial advisor who specializes in helping those in higher education to take control of their retirement. Since 2001, Greg has helped employees all over the country make the most of their retirement plans.
Hey folks, Greg Shepard here with Higher Ed Retire Podcast. As always, I appreciate everyone listening to my silly little podcast I've had for quite some time now. Okay, so this podcast really centers around you. You know, I'm trying to teach you all things that you won't learn anywhere else. I know this because I've been dealing with higher ed retirement plans for 20 years now, and there's a severe lack of information when it comes to all things surrounding retirement plans and the features that you can take advantage of. So folks, if you want to learn and implement a number of features that you're probably not aware of in your retirement plan, check out other podcasts on my website, safinancialservices.com. Click on the podcast tab, and guess what you'll find? Probably some podcasts. Okay, so today's topic, folks, we're going to bring it back to the basics a little bit. So I've received some emails and phone calls recently. Did I say phone calls? I have not received phone calls. I can't tell you the last time I received a phone call. So I get a lot of emails through various sources, actually, with very simple questions, okay? So a lot of my podcasts might get into the weeds a little bit surrounding nuances and features of your retirement plan, which is fantastic. I get a lot of feedback from that positively. A lot of you out there, higher ed employees, just want to talk about a simple topic like rolling over your 403b to an IRA, okay? I don't think I've done a podcast regarding that, so that's what we're going to do this time. Bringing it back to the basics. And folks, if you get into the weeds on this podcast or any other podcast that you listen to or anything surrounding your retirement plan, folks, email me. You don't have to be a client of mine to email me. My email is greg@shepardfinancial.com. Shepard is Shepard. I can't tell you how many times it's been misspelled. And folks, I deal with higher ed institutions, higher ed institutional retirement plans for those employed with higher ed for 20 years now, so you ain't got nothing I haven't seen before. All right, folks, so let me help you. That's what I'm here for. Okay, so let's get into this. Now, for the sake of this podcast going forward, when I say 403b, I'm actually talking about 403b, 457s, and 401as. I just don't want to say that 20 times during this podcast. 403bs are typically synonymous with the other two plans. There might be some specific rules surrounding the 401as and 457s. So on some of these things I talk about, if you're not sure if it applies to your plan, just email me or contact your vendor like a TIAA or a Fidelity and ask them. Okay, so how we're going to break this down is, by the way, I have nothing written down. We're going off the top of my head, so forgive me as I fumble through this. We're going to talk about some scenarios as to when you would roll over your 403b to an IRA. Okay. We're going to talk about how, like the logistics and that fun stuff. Where does your money go when you're rolling this over to an IRA? And the most important, probably, why? Why would you do this? Okay? Now, I'm going to end this podcast by giving out, I guess, something for free. It sounds kind of salesy, but it's really not. It's something that will help you out. So stick around till the end, and I'm going to share that with you, okay? All right, folks, let's get started here. So off the top of my head, I can think of three scenarios as to why you'd roll over your 403b to an IRA. The first one's very simple. You have an old employer plan. I think we can all grasp this concept. You used to work for ABC Higher Ed Institution, and now you work for XYZ Higher Ed Institution. Okay, so that plan over there at ABC, you can leave it there. You can roll it over to XYZ. Most cases, you can roll it over to XYZ retirement plan, 403b to 403b. Most employers will allow that. Third option is to go from ABC retirement plan to a rollover IRA. Okay, and that's what I'm advocating here if it makes sense. Okay, I'll piggyback off that later in the podcast here. Second scenario, if you've retired, you have this 403b, 457, 401a sitting at, well, it's under the umbrella of your higher ed institution. You take that money and roll it over to an IRA and take distributions as income from that rollover IRA. That's a second scenario. Third scenario, again, plan specific. This one's more specific. So you'd want to either contact me or your plan vendor within your higher ed institution, but it's an in-service rollover. So a lot of institutions, and by the way, I have a podcast on this topic somewhere in the archives. If you're over 59 and a half years old, you're eligible to do an in-service transfer, an in-service rollover from the plan, from the ABC higher ed institution plan to a rollover IRA and continue your contributions or deposits with that 403B. Okay, again, podcast, go check it out on that topic. 3 scenarios right there as to when this would apply. Okay, so how do you do this? Very simple. Either email me. Well, I say it's simple. It can be a little more complicated than one thinks. My clients contact me. So if you're working with an advisor, contact that person. He or she should have a working relationship. If they specialize in this area, they should have a working relationship in a lot of cases with TIAA or Fidelity, because they are the big boys in this sandbox. They are the big players in the higher ed retirement plans. Your advisor should have a working relationship with that vendor, and that advisor, like myself, will take care of everything. Now, why I stress that? Because especially if you're working with TIAA, paperwork abound, especially, again, if you're working with TIAA traditional account, which is that fixed account, which I'm not a huge fan of. Again, podcast on that. Paperwork can be, I don't even know, difficult. I even get it mixed up, and I've been doing this for 20 years. So it can be difficult, especially surrounding the TIAA traditional. Please don't go through that process yourself. Have someone help you out. But it's literally just as easy as making a phone call to the vendor or contacting your approved advisor and having that person help you out. Okay, next, where do you go with this money? So let's bring it back a little bit. A lot of you will have a 403B, 457, 401A with most of you, again, TIAA Fidelity, okay? So there's a lot of times, I'd say 9 out of 10, 8 out of 10, 8.5 out of 10, I will take, my clients, of course, I will take those monies, roll it over to Charles Schwab. I've been using Schwab since I've been doing this business for 20 years. I love that platform, but you can choose any vendor that allows this, that has rollover IRAs, okay? TD will accept the money, of course. Fidelity, Vanguard, American Century, you name it. You can just roll the money over to that IRA, okay? So that's the where. This leads me into the why, okay? So why do you do this? Let me expand on this one for just a bit. This one's kind of multifaceted, okay? So the easy answer to the why is because there are more choices. Again, let me expand. So let's say you have an old employer plan. You were at ABC, now you're at XYZ. So your ABC employer plan, you no longer work there. It's with TIAA, okay? So if you're a client of mine or a prospect, I'd say, hey, we have your money here at ABC with TIAA. We could roll it over to an IRA or roll it into your XYZ retirement plan at Fidelity. Now, any good advisor worth a lick will have some sort of software. I use what's called Riskalyze. It's an awesome software in my space. And what I do very simply is input the portfolio at ABC institution. Remember, that's TIAA. Put it in the software. We put Fidelity, that's at XYZ institution, put that in the software, and put the rollover IRA, that's another option, at Schwab in my case, into the software. And I say, Mr. or Mrs. Client or prospect, here are the 3 options. You got ABC, you got XYZ, and you got a rollover IRA at Schwab. Here are the fees assessed with each. Here are the investments I would recommend with each. You make a business decision, and we'll go the route that you want to go with me providing my 2 cents. Okay? Folks, I, as an advisor, get paid either way. I don't have a dog in the fight. All right? Now, this is very important. So the why is because, in my case, the first why is we have a lot more choices at that rollover IRA or in that rollover IRA than we do at ABC or XYZ institution. Okay? So we can get individual stocks if we want them. We can get ETFs, which, by the way, you can get ETFs inside some of your plans at your higher ed institution. Listen to another podcast of mine. Okay? Brokerage link. There are not enough superlatives positively about brokerage link. Okay, so let's get back to the point here. So more options in a rollover IRA than your normal, quote unquote, normal 403B, 457, 401A at ABC or XYZ higher ed institution. Next thing, on the topic of why, this one, for consolidation purposes. So if you retire, taking distributions, and I say this from experience, taking distributions from an old employer retirement plan is a logistical nightmare. Okay? 100% of the time, my clients, we will remove the monies from their retirement plan and put it in a rollover IRA for purposes of distributions, because if you take distributions, at least the institutions I've dealt with, which there are plenty, higher ed institutions, when I have a client taking distributions from that plan, we not only have to deal with, Fidelity typically or TIAA, we have to deal with the higher ed institution as well. And that, some of you may have experience with this, not typically high on the to-do list for someone taking distributions from a retirement plan. So it gets kind of pushed back, and it just gets exhausting, to be honest. So I'd rather have control over it in that regard, okay? In my case, Schwab, rollover IRA, it's like clockwork. So sticking on the why, I want to expand on fees real quick. So remember when I said 8.5-ish, I'm kind of making that number up. Not 100% of the time, not necessarily 80% of the time, somewhere in the middle there. We'll roll the money over to an IRA. So what am I talking about the rest of the 15%-ish? So sometimes an employer will have a very good retirement plan. I can think of 3 off the top of my head that allow brokerage link, and they're perfectly fine investments. And we get into index investments, sometimes ETFs, and they're very cheap where they are. So there's not really a huge advantage of rolling that money over to an IRA. And I justify this with my software. Folks, remember, any good advisor that is a true fiduciary must justify why he or she is taking money out of your 403B into a rollover IRA, especially if they're not getting paid on the current, the 403B money. All right, so all of a sudden, here I am as an advisor. I'm getting paid 1% on the rollover IRA, but I wasn't getting paid on the 403B. Be wary of that. Be wary of that. Now, my clients, I deal with institutions I can get paid while they're in service. Okay, so I don't have a dog in the fight, so to speak. So again, Mr. and Mrs. Client, here are your fees, here are your costs, here are the investment options in your old retirement plan. Same thing over here at the rollover IRA. Here is the information. We go over it. Folks, you make the business decision with my 2 cents as advice, and we go from there. That is what a true fiduciary advisor should do for you. If you don't have that, move on down the road and find someone that will help you out with that. Fees, 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 fees. I cannot say this enough. Now, moving on to, I guess, somewhat of the end of this podcast. Folks, if you contact me, please mention this podcast, and I will do what I'm about to tell you for free, okay? My clients pay me a lot of money to do this. Remember that software I was talking about where I put portfolios in it, and it spits out all this information, costs, performance, more information than you will ever need. I will do this for you for free. Now, the reason I'm doing this, I'm trying to gain traction on this podcast, at least trying to figure out if I'm gaining traction on this podcast. So this is one way I can think of doing this. So folks, contact me. I will do this for you on the various scenarios that are going on in your financial life, and you will find out what is the best scenario for you. Leave your old money at ABC, roll it to your new employer at XYZ, take all your old money and new money if you're over 59.5, roll it over to an IRA. Whatever the case is, this software will show you that, okay? Contact me, mention this podcast, and I'm going to help you out. Not only that, folks, I will actually do a retirement plan for you. I am wary, I am hesitant on doing this because I have no idea how many folks are going to take advantage of this. This is pretty powerful stuff. Folks, look up the software. Riskalyze for the software I was talking about earlier. Money Guide Pro is what I use for retirement planning purposes. This is a pretty awesome feature, folks. Again, mention the podcast. Let me know that you heard this offer on the podcast, and I will certainly do it all for free. I'm a man of my word. Hey, if you have other questions surrounding your retirement plan, again, my podcast can be found on safinancialservices.com. Click the podcast tab, and I think you know how to do it from there. Email greg@shepardfinancial.com. Shepard is Shepard. Folks, I hope you learned at least one piece of information from this podcast. That is my goal, for you to take away one or two pieces of implementable, if that's a word, pieces of information. Okay, folks? Again, Greg Shepard here. Folks, take control of your retirement today.
Thanks for listening to the Higher Ed Retire Podcast. Just because this episode is over doesn't mean you can't continue your retirement journey. Please visit www.higheredretire.com to see how you can work with Greg or to simply ask him a question. Thanks again.
S&A Financial Services is a registered investment advisor. Information presented is for educational purposes only and does not intend to make an offer or solicitation for the sale or purchase of any specific securities, investments, or investment strategies. Investments involve risk and, unless otherwise stated, are not guaranteed. Be sure to first consult with a qualified financial advisor and/or tax professional before implementing any strategy discussed herein. Past performance is not indicative of future performance.